I saw her face in the mirror last night, pale as burial cloth, her lips moving without sound. My sister Margaret has been dead for 3 months, buried in the family plot behind our estate. Yet there she was, in the silvered glass, her eyes wide with terror, pointing behind me at something I couldn't see. When I spun around, my bedroom was empty, but when I looked back at the mirror, blood was dripping from her mouth. The first time it happened, I thought grief had finally broken my mind. Mother always said I was too sensitive, too given to flights of fancy, but this was different. Margaret's reflection appeared just as I was unpinning my hair, her face suddenly visible over my left shoulder, mouth opening in a silent scream. I dropped my hairbrush and it clattered against the wash basin, and in that moment of distraction, she vanished. But I knew what I'd seen. Our family has owned Blackthorn Manor since 1743, though the estate's reputation has always been darker than its impressive facade suggests. Father rarely speaks of his childhood here, and grandmother died in this very house, under circumstances that remain unmentioned at dinner tables. Margaret used to joke that the walls remembered things they shouldn't, that the house kept secrets in its bones. She stopped joking about it 3 weeks before she died. The official cause of death was a fall down the main staircase. She broke her neck, the doctor said, a terrible accident that occurred while the rest of us were at evening service in the village. But Margaret never missed church, never, and she'd specifically told me that morning she planned to attend. When we found her, her body was twisted at an impossible angle, eyes still open, staring up at the chandelier with an expression of absolute horror. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had pushed her, though I had no proof and no suspects. Our household consisted only of father, mother, myself, Margaret, and our 3 servants, Mrs. Brennan the cook, old Thomas the groundskeeper, and Iris the housemaid. All of them had been with us for years, and none had any reason to harm my gentle sister. Yet the image of her terrified eyes haunted me through the funeral, through the mourning period, through the endless gray days that followed. The mirror had belonged to our grandmother, Mitt. It was an ornate thing, baroque and beautiful, with a frame of tarnished silver depicting twisted vines and strange flowers that seemed to move in candlelight. Mother wanted to cover it after Margaret died, following the old tradition, but Father forbade it. He called such practices superstitious nonsense, remnants of peasant thinking. Now I wished I'd thrown a sheet over it myself. Margaret appeared again the following night, more insistent this time. Her reflection materialized while I was washing my face, and when I looked up, water dripping from my chin. She was there in the mirror, standing in what appeared to be my room but wasn't quite right. The walls behind her were darker, stained with something that looked like rot or blood. She was pointing again, gesturing frantically toward my wardrobe. I walked to the wardrobe on trembling legs, half convinced I was experiencing some sort of breakdown. The mirror showed Margaret nodding urgently, her lips forming words I couldn't hear. I opened the wardrobe door and found nothing but my dresses, my shoes, my hat boxes, arranged exactly as they should be. When I looked back at the mirror in frustration, Margaret was weeping, shaking her head, and then she simply faded away like morning mist. Sleep became impossible. I lay awake each night, listening to the house settle and creak, wondering if Margaret would appear again, wondering what she was trying to tell me. Mother noticed my deterioration and called for Dr. Whitmore, who prescribed laudanum and rest. I took neither. Whatever was happening, I needed to face it with a clear mind, even if that mind was slowly unraveling. On the 3rd night, I decided to confront the mirror directly. I lit every candle in my room and sat before it, staring at my own reflection until my eyes ached. "All right," I whispered, feeling foolish and desperate. "You're truly there. If this isn't madness, please show me what you need me to see." For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, my reflection began to change. It wasn't Margaret who appeared this time. It was me, but not me. My face aged and twisted with terror, my nightgown torn and stained with dark patches. This other version of myself was screaming, pounding on the glass from the inside, and behind her I could see flames. The room in the mirror was burning, smoke billowing across the ceiling, and my future self was trapped, burning, dying. The vision lasted only seconds before the mirror returned to normal. I understood then. Margaret wasn't haunting me out of spite or unfinished business. She was trying to save me from whatever fate had claimed her, whatever dark thing lurked in Blackthorn Manor's heart. The warning was clear. If I didn't act, I would die here too, probably by fire if the vision held truth. A day. What could I do? Where could I even begin to unravel this mystery? The answer came from an unexpected source. Iris, the housemaid, knocked on my door the next morning with breakfast and found me still sitting before the mirror, exhausted and frightened. She saw something in my face, some recognition of terror that made her pause. "You've seen her too, haven't you?" she asked quietly, closing the door behind her. "Miss Margaret, she's been trying to tell you." Iris had been the one to find Margaret's body. She'd returned early from the village with a headache, entered through the servant's door, and heard the terrible sound of my sister's fall. Or so she'd told the constable. Now, sitting on the edge of my bed with her hands twisted in her apron, she told me a different story entirely. "I didn't hear her fall, miss. I heard her scream, and then I heard your father shouting." Her voice was barely a whisper, her eyes darting to the door as if father might materialize there. "I hid in the pantry because I was frightened. Heard him talking to someone, another man, but I couldn't make out the words. When I finally came out, Miss Margaret was already dead, and your father was alone, standing at the top of the stairs. The room seemed to tilt around me. What are you saying? That my father killed Margaret?" Even speaking the words felt like betraying everything I'd ever known, but somewhere deep inside, something clicked into place. Father's strange calm at the funeral, his insistence that we not cover the mirrors, his increasing irritation whenever I mentioned Margaret's name. "I'm saying your father was there when she died, and he never told a soul," Iris said. "And I'm saying you should look in the place she keeps pointing to. Not your wardrobe, miss. Hers." She stood quickly, smoothing her apron. "Said too much already. Be careful. Ever happened to Miss Margaret, whoever's responsible, they're still in this house." Margaret's room had been locked since her death, the key kept in Mother's possession. Intimate. Mother took laudanum every night for her nerves and slept like the dead until late morning. It was easy enough to slip into her room and borrow the key. My heart hammering so hard I thought it might wake the entire household. The lock turned with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the silent house. Margaret's room smelled of dust and rosewater, her perfume. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Her bed made, her books stacked neatly on the nightstand, her embroidery hoop sitting in the chair by the window with needle and thread still attached. It felt like a shrine, a moment frozen in amber. I walked to her wardrobe and opened it with shaking hands. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Margaret's dresses hung in neat rows, her bonnets arranged on the upper shelf, and I remembered what Iris had said. "Look where she keeps pointing." I began removing the dresses, laying them carefully on the bed, until the back panel of the wardrobe was exposed. And there, barely visible in the dim light, was a seam that shouldn't exist. My fingers found the edge and pulled. The false back came away to reveal a hollow space, and inside was a leather journal I'd never seen before. Margaret's handwriting covered the pages in increasingly frantic script. I carried it to the window where pale dawn light was beginning to filter through, and I began to read. What I found there made my blood turn to ice. Margaret had discovered father's secret. He was deeply in debt, had been for years, gambling away the family fortune in London clubs and desperate business ventures. Blackthorn Manor itself was mortgaged to the hilt, and creditors were closing in. But father had found a solution, a business partner named Cornelius Thorne, who would pay off all debts in exchange for a share in the estate and something else. Something Margaret's journal called the arrangement. The arrangement involved me. I was to marry Thorne, a man 30 years my senior. A man Margaret described as having dead eyes and hands that leave bruises. Father had already signed the contracts, already accepted Thorne's money. The wedding was to take place in 4 months, just after my 18th birthday. Margaret had confronted father, threatened to tell mother and me, threatened to go to the authorities about his debts and his lies. He looked at me with such hatred, Margaret had written in her final entry, dated the morning of her death. I see now that father would do anything to protect this arrangement, to keep his secrets. He's not the man we believed him to be. There's something broken in him, something that died when grandmother passed, or I'm frightened of what he might do. But I must tell Caroline. She cannot marry that monster. She cannot become another sacrifice to this cursed house. The journal fell from my hands. My father had killed Margaret. Maybe not with his own hands. Maybe it truly was a fall. But he'd caused it nonetheless, driven her to that staircase while arguing, perhaps pushed her in rage or desperation. And now he planned to sell me to Cornelius Thorne like a piece of property, to trade my life for his comfort. A sound behind me made me spin around. Father stood in the doorway, still in his nightclothes, his face unreadable in the gray light. I thought I heard someone moving about, he said quietly. His eyes fell on the journal at my feet, and something shifted in his expression. You shouldn't have read that, Carolyn. Your sister always did have an overactive imagination. She wrote that you would say that. I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Every word in there is true, isn't it? You sold me to Cornelius Thorne, killed Margaret when she tried to stop you. I backed toward the window, measuring the distance, knowing I could never survive the fall from this height. Father stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I didn't kill your sister. She fell. We argued. Yes, and she became hysterical, but I never touched her. His voice was reasonable, calm, the voice he used to settle disputes between tenants. Margaret always was unstable. Surely you remember her episodes, her wild fancies. She wasn't unstable. She was terrified. Of you, of what you'd become. I glanced at the mirror on Margaret's vanity and saw her there, standing behind father, her face pleading. She was pointing at the window, at something outside. I looked and saw Thomas in the garden below, starting his morning work. Father followed my gaze to the mirror and laughed, a hollow sound. Still seeing ghosts, are we? The doctor was right. You need rest, Carolyn. You need care. Fortunately, Cornelius arrives today to formally meet you. He has excellent doctors at his estate, specialists who can help with your delicate condition. He reached for me, and I saw in his eyes the same thing Margaret must have seen, absolute determination. I was a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated. I screamed. I screamed as loudly as I could and threw myself toward the window, smashing the glass with Margaret's embroidery hoop. Thomas, Mrs. Brennan, help me. He killed Margaret. Help. The glass shattered outward, and I kept screaming, kept making noise, kept drawing attention. Father grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, trying to pull me away from the window. We struggled, and I felt the same terror Margaret must have felt in her final moments. But I had one advantage, she hadn't. I knew what he was capable of. When he pulled me toward the door, toward the staircase where Margaret had died, I went limp, becoming dead weight. We tumbled together, not down the stairs, but onto the landing. Thomas burst through the servants' entrance below, Mrs. Brennan behind him. Mother emerged from her room, confused and frightened. They saw Father on top of me, his hands around my wrists, saw the broken window and my terror. They saw the journal lying open on Margaret's floor. "Read it," I gasped. "Read what he did. Read what he's planning." The truth came out slowly, painfully, like poison from a wound. Thomas and Mrs. Brennan read the journal. Mother confronted Father, who finally admitted to the debts, to Cornelius Thorne, to the arrangement. He maintained that Margaret's death was an accident, that she'd fled from their argument and simply fell. But Iris came forward with her testimony about hearing him shout, about the mysterious second voice. Cornelius Thorne arrived that afternoon in a black carriage, and Mother sent him away without explanation. The wedding contracts were void, she declared, and she would see him in court if necessary. Thorne's face in that moment told me everything Margaret had written was true. He looked at me like I was something he'd purchased and been cheated of, his dead eyes full of cold rage. Father left Blackthorn Manor that night. Mother gave him money for passage to America and told him never to return. T estate would go to me when I came of age. The debts be damned. We would find another way, she said, one that didn't require sacrificing daughters. I never saw him again, though I heard years later he'd died in New York, alone and penniless. Margaret appeared in my mirror one final time. I'd moved her mirror into my room, feeling somehow that she deserved a place there. She looked peaceful now, no longer terrified, no longer warning. She smiled at me, touched her hand to the glass from her side, and I pressed my palm against hers. The glass was cold, but for just a moment, I swear I felt her warmth. The mirror never showed me visions again. But sometimes, late at night, I catch a glimpse of movement in its depths, a flash of familiar smile. Margaret saved me from the grave she'd fallen into. Her ghost, her love, her desperate warnings from beyond death itself. Blackthorn Manor kept its secrets in the walls, yes, but it also kept its ghosts. And sometimes, if you're lucky, those ghosts love you enough to break through the veil and pull you back from darkness.